All right. Thanks, everybody who has come back from lunch on time. So welcome back to GLAM, Generous and Open Galleries, Libraries, Archives and Museums. Our next speaker is Bonnie Wildie, and she's going to wow us. So one of the things that actually inspired this mini-conf was the Open GLAM mini-conf that was run in Sydney 2 years ago. And Bonnie did this amazing talk there. So no pressure, Bonnie, but we're looking forward to something just as amazing.
Great, great. Okay, hey Go Glammers, how you doing? Great. Awesome, all right. So for those of you who didn't come this morning, Go Glam stands for Generous and Open Galleries, Libraries, Archives and Museums. So that's what's going to be the focus of this talk. I'm looking particularly at, actually I can't give that away because that will ruin my second slide, oh no. So finding aids as open data access points to data drive stories of the past. What I will also be asking you to do, and I did this last time we met, is to jump on Twitter for me if you feel inclined. We're using this LCA 2020 and hashtag GoGlam. Last time we did this, BuzzFeed Australia picked us up. We can do it again, I'm sure. All right, what have we got here? A library. And what tells us that it's a library? The books with stickers on them. What do the stickers mean? Dewey Decimal, okay. And what can you see here? What kind of books are we looking at? Biographies. And what's the Dewey number for biography? So it's 920 is biographies. So armed with that number, what can we do?
Find other things that are similar.
Right, okay, so what we have here are all the books on that particular topic, and I can walk into any library that uses that same classification system and find books either the same or similar, right? Beautiful, the system works. So yes, we're looking at libraries. These are deliberately collected collections. They have a linear description and artificial arrangement. So we group things together to help users find like with like. Does that make sense? That echoes your experience of using a library? Excellent. And we access those via a catalogue. Nice and simple. We type something in. What have we got here? An archive. So who's used an archive? Some, but less than the majority, okay? Archives are much more tricky to navigate. They're naturally accumulated, they have a hierarchical description, and the arrangement is organic, okay? What is the special thing about archives? Provenance. They're unique, right? So I can't go just to any archive and access what's in this box, right? I have to go here and have a look in this specific box to find these specific items. They don't exist anywhere else. It's not like a library where there's duplication. Does that make sense? Okay, so we have finding aids to help us. Look at this mess. So this is how we understand archives to be created. And when we talked about provenance, we have to understand how important the context is to what we're looking at. So we have things like functions and activities which are exercised by or associated with agencies and persons. Okay? Agencies create record series. Record series create record items. So you can see just how complex this data is that we're looking at and how tricksy it can be for users to actually get down to what they're wanting, which are these items. And then to compound this, we need to remember that items aren't necessarily a single thing. An item can be a file that contains 100 pages. Okay, so it becomes even more complex. This is another depiction, if you like. So we have a single agency. It might be the Department of Agriculture. They have a series, so it could be a correspondence series. And then within that series, you have the various files. Does that make sense in terms of what we're looking at structurally? Beautiful. So as I said, we access this material using finding aids, and this is a definition for us, and I want us to just lock in some of these key words that come through. So a finding aid is a tool that facilitates discovery of information. Discovery, that's what I want us to cling on to. We also see it described as a description of records that contains the repository physical and intellectual control over the materials, and that assists users to gain access to and understand the materials. So we've got discovery, access, and understanding. This is one of these finding aids, if you like. It's a description of a record series, and these kind of descriptions are, we have standards, if you like, that tell us what we need to include in various descriptions. So what we have here is a number, so a unique number. We're told the title, so these are general correspondence files by the Animal Quarantine Service. So that's that agency that's creating this series of correspondence files. We can see the year coverage is 1929 through to 1980. We're given a description. So if we're interested in animals in zoos and circuses, this might be the series for us. And then we're told here that there's 19 boxes, so quite a bit of material to get through, and we're told that item lists are not available electronically. So getting into this series is quite difficult. Possibly we could go and have a look at these shelf lists. We're told that it's arranged by subject, which is a nice start. So hopefully if we looked at circuses, all of our circus animals would be under there, but we won't know until we dig into the series. So it's a lot of hard work compared to what we do in libraries. This is why we get things like indexes. So these can be created from original records. It might be a single document, it might be a single series, it could be a few series brought together, it could be other finding aids. But we create these indexes to assist with reference inquiries, to assist users to access records, maybe ones that are frequently used. We can also create indexes for underutilised collections because it makes them more accessible. And we see here, according to the Australian Society of Archivists, that census, convict and land records are examples of high-use series that have benefited from being indexed. So when we look at an index, this is what we're looking at. And it's nice and accessible, okay? So I've just taken a screenshot here. How do we interrogate this data in its present form? Yeah, exactly. We have that ubiquitous search box up here, okay? And it's asking us a question. And what is the question it's asking us? Keyword, essentially, it's a name, right? Essentially, it's saying, you already have something that you're wanting to find, pop it in here, and we'll give you the results. So that's really great when you already have a question that you want answered, right? My question is there anything on Julia Kane? The answer is, yeah, sure. Here we go. So we can have a look here. This is our Julia Kane. She came on the Princess Charlotte in 1827. We have various record types, so ticket of leave and conditional pardon. Interestingly, this is dated 1849. So I'd be interested, maybe she was sentenced to life. Anyway, these are questions that we can ask. And then we've got some remarks there. So we're told that she's in Bathurst and that she was a laundress. So we're presented with some interesting data and encouraged to pursue this via these citations where we can actually go and access the original record, which is all lovely, isn't it? Nice, good stuff. So what happens when we take this GLAM data and we make it open data? We have agencies like the Queensland State Archives who are proactively releasing this data as open data and asking us to play with it. So here are some lovely selections. So you can see here St Helena Prisoners Index. We've got a register of land, stage licenses, which I can only imagine are just wonderful things. So these are all available as open data via the Queensland Government's Open Data Portal, where we can jump in and have a play. Really lovely stuff. Now, if you are on Twitter and you feel like shouting out to Queensland State Archives for sharing their data sets with us as open data, you can do that now, and that would be fantastic. And the glitter is for GLAM, obviously, so. I'm going to keep us moving because I've got so much to talk about. So this is the State Library, and they also have some data sets that are available on their website, so you can jump in, actively reuse those, and they encourage us to use the hashtag #MadeWithSLNSW when we use these data sets for creative works. And again, we've got a nice shout out there for the State Library of New South Wales if you feel so inclined. So the reason why I do this is to, if you're outside of the GLAM world, you might not be familiar with these institutions and their presence on things like Twitter, but also to amplify the work that we do within these institutions and the GLAM sector as a whole. We also, though, have data that is possibly, I've said set free here, so it kind of suggests that it's been restricted in some way, but what we find is data that sits behind an institutional interface, if you like. And we have wonderful, magical data wizards who are actually able to scrape that and extract that data and release it as open data sets for us to use. And that magical wizard in particular is Tim Sherratt, who's already been referenced this morning. The work that he does for the GLAM sector is just unimaginable, and I would really encourage you to go and check out his site. You can support Tim and the work that he does, and I'll be referencing a couple of his things throughout this talk, but really important work as we discussed this morning. So one of these incredible projects that he has is the GLAM Workbench. And this is where he's collected a whole lot of GLAM data and basically put it in a format where we can get in there, we can download the data, and we can also play with it. So for those of us who are non-technical, it's this incredibly safe environment where we can begin to ask a whole variety of questions of this data without actually needing the technical skills ourselves to do it. So a lot of the stories that I'm going to tell in, hopefully not that long, are actually driven by what Tim Sherratt has made available. So I'm definitely focusing on, in this talk, the New South Wales State Archives indexes that have been scraped by Tim Sherratt and made available both on his GLAM Workbench and on GitHub. So you can see here I've just taken a screenshot of some of these indexes that have been made available. This is via the GLAM Workbench. You can see there's 64 indexes that have been indexed, so jump on there and go and have a play. There's all sorts of things to have a look at. The first data set that I played with was probably, 2016, 2017. And it was when Tim had harvested these and popped them up on GitHub. And I went and had a look at the list. I'm like, how do you choose from 60 plus data sets? I went to the bottom and sorry, just before I go on to that point, this is a link to the GLAM Workbench. This is Tim's handle on Twitter. This is redaction art, so that is something from our LCA 2018, if you are interested in following that up and having a look at what's going on here. And this is our shout out to Tim Sherratt for literally everything that he is doing. So we'll just say hi to Tim. I think he's in the process of moving, so I'm sure he will appreciate getting pinged from everyone here in this conference. All right, so as I mentioned, what I did when presented with these open data was to have a look at this list and essentially went to the bottom of it and hit U for unemployed in Sydney, 1866. So this is, when we talk about it in archival terms, it's coming from the Colonial Secretary's Special Bundles series. So the Colonial Secretary was like the dude in colonial New South Wales. He did everything, essentially. Nothing sort of happened in the state without going through him. And I say him deliberately. And when we come to organising this material, there's these wonderful special bundles. So if something was important enough, it sort of gets pulled out of the main series of records. And it's a researcher's dream because it's so much easier to find than when it's sort of stuck in the main series of letters and you've got to trace things through. So in this instance, we're looking at a special bundle, persons out of employment in Sydney, 1866. There's 3,000 names in this particular index. And just as a little bit of historical context, The New South Wales Colonial Secretary urged the Inspector General of Police to find out and report on the persons who were unemployed in Sydney, and he then sent out his police and detectives to find that information out. And so this is records associated with that act. So this is an example of one of the pages. So it's glorious, beautiful stuff, just even to look at. It's wonderful. But in terms of what we've got information-wise or data-wise, we see name, residence, and sometimes we just get streets, but we also get specific places, like 14 Clarence Street or something like that. We get our occupation, whether they're married or single, how long they've been in the colony, how long they've been out of employment, how much they've earned in the last 6 months, and also any other remarks. So this document has then been turned into an index that we can again query if we have that question. So in this instance, I've asked the question for any results, WIL with an asterisk, and this is what we get. And so you can see that some of those columns have been replicated here in this data. What we can do, so you can see that that data in that previous slide is restricted, isn't it, to what I've asked to be shown. When we get the whole data set, we can ask much bigger questions. So this is what we, so I wanted to know, okay, what were the occupations? What were people not doing? And you can see overwhelmingly that there's labourers that are out of work. When we remove labourers from the data set to just get a bit deeper in, we can see things like carpenters, boiler makers, butchers. I was really interested to see seamen, mariners and sailors broken out, and I wondered what the difference was, and there is a difference. So apparently sailors basically do what you tell them to do, which is good. Seamen, however, understand navigation. And then mariners are the type of people who make their living from the sea, so things like fishermen, right? And I did not know that. I went and consulted an 18th century book to tell me the hierarchy of these various terms, because I wanted to know whether it was just, like making up a title, or was there differentiation, and it turns out there was. So this is really interesting. It gives us an overview of the types of jobs people did, and also, asks us to sort of question, was there an abundance of painters in Sydney? I don't know. That's something we can ask of the data. As we saw, we also got those wonderful street names. And so I used CartoDB, we can map those streets. Now, this needs a bit of work. This was me one afternoon. Obviously, there's some work to do with streets that no longer exist. So ideally, I would take an historic map and do all of that work, but this is very preliminary. But you get these wonderful hotspots around George Street and all of those kind of places, the rocks. It's really lovely. And then we can go and actually sort of get a sense of the people and where they, the streets that they walked, the houses that they lived in. So this one is Yurong Street. This is Argyle Street, Argyle Place, I think. And then we've got this beautiful laneway, which is just gorgeous. So these people start to sort of come alive when we interrogate the data in these ways. We can also have a look at that mapping. So go back to that data that I popped in and start to have a look at it by occupation. So if I told you that one of these depicts labourers and one of them depicts out-of-work seamen, which is which? Yeah, so this is where our seamen are. So we see this like conglomeration, like these people all around sort of the Piedmont and the Rocks area, which is just fabulous, I think. And again, it asks us to sort of unpack, were these people, was occupation actually deciding or determining where people were living? And another, sort of interesting aspect to interrogate. When we can see the data en masse, it can also challenge our understanding of the data. So I just assumed that it was only going to be men who were unemployed, and that might just be a reflection of me. But we can see here that there are women in this data. We have women tradeswomen, we have women labourers, and we have women tobacconists. And that was something that was new to me and not something that I anticipated in finding in the data. We also have, and this is just a small portion of the list, people who are recorded as open air or no home, no residence, they're living in boarding houses, they're at the refuge. And I think that invites us to ask questions of how we, if we are mapping people, right, if we're looking at geographic location, what do we do with these people who have no location? And I think asking those deeper questions of the data is really important as well. This letter accompanies the data, that listing that we saw. And it's really illuminating and helps us to place what we're looking at in the historical context. So this, again, gorgeous handwriting. So this is the inspector, the person who's been asked to undertake this task, and he's writing back to the colonial secretary. And he has some things to say. So he says the accuracy of the list cannot be relied upon. Oh no. He says many of the men named are not unemployed, and others state that their names have been placed on the list without their knowledge or sanction. And he also says that some of the people who have been placed on the list have been observed by the police to attend meetings for the unemployed. So what we find is, it feels like an instance of government surveillance, right, of this community that is actually possibly quite disadvantaged. And that made me uneasy. And it made me uneasy to go back to the records. Let me see if I pop that in here. I'll talk about this in a second. To go back to the record and to see that this not found actually means that the person who's recorded, the police weren't able to go back and actually verify whether they were unemployed or not. And when we look at this, all of these people were not found. So many of these people were not found. And others are saying, well, actually, I'm not unemployed. So I think it really shifts how we understand the data when we start to look at it in this way as well, and think about people being put on these lists without their knowledge or approval. We can go to Trove. Has anyone used Trove? Is everyone aware of Trove? Yeah, great, okay. So we can go to the historical context and find that just weeks before the document was created, 2,000 to 3,000 people had actually met in Sydney demanding that the government take action on the unemployment crisis that was occurring. So we have civil unrest happening as well. So that kind of, I think, when we look at this this comment about have been observed by the police to attend meetings, also shows a different, it gives us something else to think about when we look at that data. Does that make sense? Yeah. Isn't it just so interesting? So again, what I'm sort of trying to get across with these stories that I'm telling is that having these large, having the data available as data sets invites us to ask these sort of questions and often provokes us into areas that we might not have imagined going before, when the data kind of looked benign, if you know what I mean. So thank you to Trove Australia for the amazing work that they do and literally changing history. Incredible stuff. So the next data set that I played around with is the publican's licenses data, and this is an index that's been created from 3 various series. And when I was talking to someone about, we could take these data sets and we can do amazing things with them, I showed them, actually I'll just show you what a license looks like quickly. So this is what was issued, this is part of what makes up the series. And this is what it looks like, again, when we're presented with that ubiquitous search box. So I've searched for wild, we're presented with those entries, we get these beautiful, look at these gorgeous names. I love them so much. Wonderful, wonderful data. So we get the person, when they applied, the name of the hotel, or sort of the title that's going to sit above the place that's licensed. Really great stuff. And then the location and a citation for finding the original document. So I showed this graph to someone, And I was, you know, this data's so amazing. Look at this. Look at that spike, right? And I said, I bet I know what that spike is. What do you reckon that spike is? So it's 1856. New South Wales. Gold rush. I was like, that's got to be the gold rush. It's got to be the gold rush, right? Everyone heading out. What do you need at the, you know, at the diggings? You need pubs, right? So we'll license them. That's what that spike is. I can't tell you how disappointed I was when I found out it was an administrative quirk. I was like so incredibly disappointed. So what you can see, I've just taken a screenshot here, is that we have a duplication. So we've got 2 entries for William, 2 entries for Thomas, 2 entries for Mary Ann, whose name is spelt differently. Again, look at these, the horse and jockey, so great. So I was like, oh no, that's so crap. So what has happened for whatever reason in this particular year, whether it's that the record survived or whether that the administrators have said, hey, we need you to do this extra work for us, we see the certificate, right? So that's been indexed. And then we also see this summary document, and that's been indexed. And so we get the 2 names in the indexed data, and that's what causes that spike for 1956. So hugely disappointed that it wasn't gold. But while I was looking at the data, right, I'm like, well, I'll just, you know, have a look at what's going on. I was like, what is going on here? I don't know if you can see in all of those. I was like, what is happening here? Why are they all on the 15th? Seems really weird, right? That all of these, and there's pages and pages and pages of the 15th of April. I'm like, what is going on? And so I went back to Trove, and it turns out that there was an annual license meeting, right? And across all of the districts, they held these meetings where you would come to get, you know, to transfer your license or apply for a license or whatever it was. And so it just was this neat little thing where I can sort of travel back in time and imagine, you know, the annual meeting, it happens on the same day across all the districts. And that's what explains that date in my data. Okay, it's again nothing I would ever imagine. I would never, even if I brought up these results, I probably would never have noticed that they were all on the same day. But having that data set in front of me again provoked that strange little question. The good thing about these, right, is that they then get reported on. So we get a little notice here that the applications of James McCrossan, John Miller and John Allingham, the 2 first for the transfer of their licences to new premises at the Rocky River Goldfield and the latter for a new public and general licence at the same place were dealt with under this particular act. Okay, and I'm like, well, I can still get away with saying that there was gold stuff going on because look at this. This is what they're doing. So I can take those names, I can go back to the data set, and we can see, I was like, oh my goodness, this is so great. So these 2 guys, House O' All Nations, beautiful, I love it, and this really optimistic El Dorado Inn happening on the Rocky River Goldfield, which is just fabulous. So I can take that and then I can go and pull up the beautiful, lovely document. So you can see that they're sort of given various details in here. Something that I quite like on the form letter that we see is that these justices have certified that they are satisfied that James McCrossan is a person of good fame and reputation and fit and proper to be licensed as aforesaid. So there's, you know, there's always this sort of moral assessment of the person, and that comes through in a variety of records, but there we have it in writing, which is quite lovely. And again, because this is from 1956, it's that weird quirk happening, and this is the other entry for that person. So we also get to see the other people who were applying for licences in that same district, and you get some wonderful names happening over there as well. Like Our House, I think is lovely. Just Our House, Our House. Gorgeous stuff. Okay, and my last story is convict applications to marry. So a lovely, fabulous topic. So this is taken from a single series, which are registers of convicts' applications to marry. There's about 8,400 entries in the index, and that is progressively growing. To place it in its historical context, Governor Darling arrives, right? And he's like big into administration, and so we see sort of an explosion in records, and he's very much about record keeping and those kind of things. So we get these beautiful registers that are produced, and when you look at the physical item, they're really lovely. So I've got an example here. So you get, the arrangement varies in some of them, but essentially what you get is the date, you've got the name of the people applying, age, the ship they came out on, because they're convicts, so of course they came out on ships. You get the clergyman who's presiding, you get the date that they're applying. You also get, you can see on this page, see how they're all allowed? Sometimes you get not allowed, right? And you get a reason for why they're not allowed. I'll talk about that in a minute. So that data is then taken, it's indexed, and we can see that it's nice and consumable in this format. So we've got John Wildie, which frankly I love as a name. He came out on the Albion, 27, sentenced to life, and he has a ticket of leave. He wants to marry Mary Pembroke. She has no ship. What does that tell us? It means that she's free. So she was probably born in the colony. So she hasn't immigrated. Or they haven't listed a convict ship, but she is free. She's 17, and they want to get married in Castlereagh. And then this is the citation where we can go and actually look at the original item. So with these, I'd seen Tim Sherratt talking about his GLAM Workbench, and I hadn't gone in and had a play. So I was like, oh, I'm pretty familiar with this series. I'd like to just go and have a look at what the GLAM Workbench can do and what it shows about this particular series. So what have we got here? Yeah, it's a word cloud, so it's showing us that pretty much everyone was called Mary or Anne. Oh, and Margaret, right? What have we got here? William and John are the popular names. I love this though. Like alias really is huge, isn't it? It's huge. What have we got here? So these are our clergymen.
We've got multiple entries for Reverend Samuel Marsden.
We do. So I think one of the things that's also lovely about this kind of stuff is it shows you the faults in your data. So if I was looking at this, I'd be like, I need to get in there and actually just have like one version of Reverend Samuel Marsden. So you can see Rev S Marsden, Marsden Rev'd Samuel, Marsden Rev'd S. Where else is he? Is that all of them? Anyway, so you can see overwhelmingly that Reverend Samuel Marsden was dishing out the permissions. Why would that have been, do you think? Does anyone?
I don't know, if you take off Reverend Chapter, it'd probably rival him, because he's in multiple times quite high list too.
Yeah, this is true. So we need to go and do some data work. Absolutely, good point. So Cowper might be there. I think it's probably, if we looked at the proportion of people sort of in that Parramatta area, we're probably seeing lots of people out around there. And then the year to get married, 1830. So, you know, this lovely little snapshot that gives us this recipe for happily ever after, right? So Mary and William with Samuel Marsden in 1830 equals happily ever after. What a delight. Except that's not always the case. So as I mentioned, with this data we see permission granted, and we also see permission denied. And I've just pulled that out, it's terrible quality, but one of the main reasons that permission was not allowed or that people were not allowed to get married, was that the female being already married. So what would happen when they asked for permission is people would have to supply. So you're a convict, right? The government basically owns you and they have a say as to what you can do. And so you would get like character references, maybe from your master or mistress, to say that you were of good and industrious and sober character. That would be put onto a form by the reverend, who would then submit that to the principal superintendent of convicts. It didn't just stop there though, right? They then consulted their own records. And I've seen cases where they will actually question the people that you were incarcerated with to say, did you have any female visitors? Did you see this guy? Did he have a family turn up or anything like that? Like, they did some really in-depth stuff to find out whether you were married or not. So what this represents is not just a list of names, right? Like, each line entry, 103, 104, 105, 106, 107, right, is a couple whose life has been subjected to government scrutiny. And then the decision based on record keeping. So in some instances, permission is denied because the name can't be found in the convict indent, so you must not exist, right? Life-changing, potentially. And I think when we start to look at these as not just data, not just names, but actually people making life decisions that are either encouraged or discouraged by government act, it becomes incredibly powerful to unpack. And when we think about these people as being marginalised and operating within a system that they have no control over, it becomes, I don't know if problematic is the right word, but I think we need to look at the data differently and just think about those people that actually lay behind the names. Does that make sense? Yeah. So those are just 3 quick stories that I wanted to share with you, just provoked by having, you know, instead of having a name that you search in a search box, you have a whole data set in front of you that you go, well, what if? Or what is this? Or that's a bit weird. Or what is the difference between a mariner and a seaman? So this is a shout out to New South Wales Archives. It's their data that we're looking at. And also a shout out to Tim Sherratt, because he's the one that's extracted it and made it available for us. So again, if you're on Twitter and feel like shouting out, that would be fantastic. And I'm just going to move us on. I've got 5 minutes, maybe? Quickly. Okay, so a lot of these finding aids have existed in physical format and are being converted into electronic. And when we have a look at some of the information around that, institutions envisage this as new ways of locating, interacting with, and sharing information about archival material. And so one of the things that I did with some of this was actually create a Twitter bot that uses this data. So it's based on, so this was made in a workshop, right, where we were asked, again by Tim Sherratt, to be a bit disruptive and to think about what we could do with a Twitter bot that would, you know, shake things up. So in this instance, it was like, you know, every article coming out was, well, this is the death of libraries. And we were like, no, okay, we're going to subvert that, we're going to knock that on the head. Bespoke muesli will be the death of libraries. Your mum will be the death of libraries. Cat cafes will be the death of libraries. And so we created this bot that tweets that kind of stuff out, right? It has a very teeny tiny vocabulary, and I don't have the password to add more. So what you see is what you get. But anyway, Library Dead was based on that principle. This is the formula that you use. It's nice and easy. So essentially, you just need a Twitter account, your data set cleaned into lists. You use cheat bots done quick, and you can find the tutorial and sort of the information that sits behind it here. So what happens when you take that publican's data and make it into a Twitter bot is that you create all these incredible fictional 1800s Oz publicans, right? Which is this wonderful, you know, if we think about that statement about new interactions, new ways of thinking about this data, this is a ridiculous way of engaging with this data. I mean, each of these is fictional. They do not exist. And yet, they could, right? like each of those looks like an archival entry. And so it then also disrupts our understanding of what is, you know, we're so beholden to that idea of original order and all of this kind of stuff. This just messes with that. It just chucks it up in the air, mucks it around. But without that context of this is a mashup, they look like real people that exist. What I also find with this bot, and look, it's got a handful of followers, it's not doing anything extraordinary in terms of numbers, but you do get people responding to it. So whether it's their local area, people have questioned me about the spelling of Musselbrook, as in like Muscle Brook, and I'm like, yeah, well, things were recorded phonetically, and here you go. So it's beautiful little quirky interactions like that that you could never imagine happening. And that's what happens when we think differently with our open data. So new audiences, new interactions and engagements, new users and uses, new questions and curiosities. I mean, so much of that was just driven by me being curious, but probably most importantly is new knowledge and new answers. And that is why I am an advocate of open data.